The Salvation Army has been active in Bermuda since 1896, when Adjutant Luti Desbrise first unfurled the Army flag. Over the last 124 years, their presence on the island has grown to many subdivisions and an extensive social services network, which provide meals for the hungry, groceries for those in need, a thrift store, and fellowship to seniors. Without a doubt, the Salvation Army has been an essential beacon of light in Bermuda. In addition to the aforementioned community services, and probably one the organization is most recognized for, is housing. For over 55 years, the Salvation Army has provided quality transitional housing and support programs for the most vulnerable in our society. However, in recent years, due to a lack of maintenance and upkeep, the properties were in urgent need of repairs and upgrades. It was the number one issue on the agenda when I first met Major Sandra Stokes in February 2019, shortly after her arrival. We discussed in great detail the lack of financial support by successive governments over a number of years to the work of the Salvation Army, and the need to renew the outdated MOU between our organizations. The Public Works Civil Engineers carried out a structural assessment of the buildings and agreed that only a few needed to be demolished while others needed some upgrading. Today, I'm pleased to publicly recognize two local philanthropists who, through their effort and contribution to this worthy cause, made these extensive renovations and repairs possible. The Government of Bermuda, through the Bermuda Housing Corporation, engaged in a public-private partnership with Mr. Jim Butterfield, who joins us today, and Mr. Kirk Kitson, to rehabilitate and refurbish the shelter buildings located on North Street and managed by the Salvation Army. Throughout this process, Major Deal of the Bermuda Housing Corporation liaised with Mr. Jim Butterfield, who was keen to support with funds and manpower, and it was agreed that the government would match the funding to upgrade the facility. Mr. Kirk Kitson joined the effort, and it was all hands on deck, with a methodical approach undertaken to repair the salvageable buildings one at a time, while the buildings that were beyond repair were demolished. At the same time, building works were in progress. Consideration was given on what style of replacement building would be ideal for the site. Many transitional housing options were considered. The Salvation Army and BHC agreed on what the replacement buildings would be, and I'd like to thank BHC Project Manager Mr. Keino Furbert Jacobs for all the work he did in researching the replacement buildings. Significant work, including the replacement of roofs, repairs to walls and foundations, and extensive plumbing and electrical work, have been completed. 2 residential buildings housing the men and women of the shelter have been remodeled and refurbished, and the central building housing the administration staff, common areas, and the kitchen were repaired, and renovations to the men's shelter on North Street have been completed. To date, just over $200,000 has been spent, split 3 ways between Mr. Butterfield, Mr. Kitson, and the government. In addition to allocated funds, Mr. Butterfield and Mr. Kitson secured a number of individuals and firms to provide monetary or in-kind support, and I would like to thank them now. They are C.F. Batson Swan, A1 Carpentry, Bitco, Mansfield Brock, Gibbons Company, Gorham's, Gray & Company, The Hustle Truck, Richard Kitson, Bill Lang, Stuart Nisbet, Pembroke Paint Company, Pembroke Tall and Stone, and Jan Spearing. In the latter part of 2019, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Community Affairs and Sports, and I, as Minister of Public Works, along with our respective permanent secretaries, met with Major Stokes and 2 visiting colonels from Salvation Army Canada to discuss the state of the facility at North Street and ongoing support of the Salvation Army in Bermuda. During this meeting, it was agreed that the project was of the utmost importance, and in order to keep the lines of communication open, quarterly meetings would be held between the Salvation Army Bermuda and the responsible permanent secretaries to ensure all operational and building-related matters received the priority they deserved. It was also agreed that the Bermuda Housing Corporation would be the first point of contact, since they have expertise in housing and the technical staff to expedite the execution of any plans. Furthermore, to support upgrading the facilities, the government committed to $1 million in capital funding in this year's budget. In addition to this sizable capital investment, the government increased its annual grant to the Salvation Army by $150,000 to $550,000 over last year to support additional services. Ultimately, as it pertains to the needs of Bermuda's vulnerable and indigent community, the government's primary objective is to ensure that the men and women in need of shelter and support have a safe place for refuge. I would like to again publicly thank Mr. Jim Butterfield, Mr. Kirk Kitson, and all those who contributed to this effort. Your contribution is much appreciated. I can say with confidence that as a result of this public-private partnership and the work that has been done, Bermuda now has the necessary facilities in place to meet that need and a commitment going forward to continue that support. Thank you, and I now invite Major Sandra Stokes to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everyone. Colonel Burch, Major Dill, Mr. Butterfield, Mrs. Daniels, Executive Director of the Salvation Army Social Services, Mr. Kel Ming, our former public relations gentleman, and ladies and gentlemen of the press here this afternoon. It is a good day. It is good to be here and to be able to share in this good news. Typically, we associate a journey with traveling. From one place to another, we have a destination in mind. And the matter of the shelter here in Bermuda has indeed been a journey. Going back to the early 80s, when these properties were first placed here, it was understood their lifespan would be but 5 years. So some 30 years later, the journey continues, and they're still standing, and we are. Just for your information and clarification, I think it's important for everyone to understand the property here belongs to the government of Bermuda, and the Salvation Army's responsibility is to operate and manage the shelter program. I would like to share with you something of the Salvation Army's mission and values and how they work out here in the country of Bermuda. Our mission is to share the love of Jesus, to meet human need, and to be a transforming influence in our communities. How we do that, how we accomplish that, is by keeping in front of us the values that also belong to the Salvation Army worldwide. Those values that govern how we serve and how we give and how we meet human need are as follows: hope, service, dignity, and stewardship. Colonel Burch has already alluded to my arrival in Bermuda in July of 2018. I well remember my first visit to this shelter site. I walked in and I walked out weeping. Weeping because they did not represent the dignity and values of the Salvation Army. And thus began the conversation with Colonel Burch and the government of Bermuda. I thought to myself, we can do better than this. The ladies and gentlemen that we serve deserve better than this. And we are doing better. Take a look around you today, and for those of you who pass by, we are doing better. We are doing better because of great collaboration with community partners. Mr. Butterfield, we are indebted to you for your investment of time and resources. Mr. Kitson, who's unable to be here today, we are indebted to you and the many other community partners that Colonel Burch just referenced. We are doing better because of people like you who care and Usher. We're doing better because of the continued support of the government of Bermuda to the work of the Salvation Army. That now provides, with a recent signed memo of understanding, a 3-year commitment to sustain funding for the shelter to operate. We're doing better because $1 million that will now flow through Bermuda Housing Corporation to begin the demolition of some of the older buildings and bring in new units. So in a few months from now, this place will look a little different than what it does today. Again, I am indebted to the government of Bermuda, to Major Dill, to Keino, our project manager, and just any day now, we should see movement in demolition and further repairs. With the facilities upgrading, with new units coming in this space, with continued and secure funding, the Salvation Army can look at developing a more impactful program for the ladies and gentlemen that we serve. And I speak of the Pathway of Hope initiative. A pathway. It also speaks of a journey, doesn't it? And some people have difficult paths. Some people's journey in life is a challenging one, and they need assistance. They need hope. They need people to come alongside. They need someone to sit with them to help create goals that will bring wholeness and richness to their lives and bring them from point A to point B on their continued journey, if you would. We are thankful for government partnership, collaboration, the government of Bermuda, Bermuda Housing Corporation, and all those that have made what we see thus far a reality, all to serve our clients better. Colonel Burch alluded to the fact that the Salvation Army next year, October 2021, will mark 125 years of service to the country of Bermuda. We are planning a celebration, and you will be invited. But again, just a big word of thank you for all those who've made this happen. And I look forward to seeing and hearing when the new units are on site, when the old buildings are demolished and no longer here, and we all can start a brand new journey towards giving hope today in a better, more dignified, respectful manner. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Colonel Burch and the majors, members of the press, members of the staff of the Salvation Army. There's very little I can add after the story was told by Colonel Burch. He didn't leave out any details, and what detail he might have missed, Sandra has swept up. But I'd just like to point out that in my mind, it was about 1.5 years ago that we met with Colonel Burch and several members of the Works and Engineering Department, and there was 2 discussions going on. I was hearing words like demolition and raise the ground. And another group, really it was a general contractor, Jonathan Gray, he had taken samples of this building here, was the first one, the pink one, and he said the structure is fine. It's just the cladding, the roof and the cladding that's bad. And as Colonel Burch listened to both sides of the argument, and I thought if it goes the demolition route, then certainly I'm out of the game. I can't play. It's going to be in the millions. But then Colonel Burch kind of looked at us, Jonathan Gray and myself, and he said, if you want to do it, you go ahead and do it. And that to us was a huge relief that what I've wanted to do for years, every time I'd travel this road, I'd look at these dilapidated, rusting, rotting buildings and thinking, we got to do better than this, as Sandra just said. And I was delighted when the major, because other ministers might have said, no, leave it with us, we'll handle it. And then he laid it down. It's a partnership here. There's 3 of us in this. And that's when Kirk Kitts and myself and Major Dill said the financing is coming. And thank you, Major Dill. Anytime I yell for a check, he's prompt to get it to me. As the Colonel said, it's been over 200,000, slightly more than 200,000. But we started with this one, and we were so delighted with the result that we then turned to the men's. And then we kind of got into difficulty because this is the largest of the buildings. It was in the worst condition, and we had a hurricane mixed up in there. We had lockdown and COVID mixed in there. And poor Jonathan, his supplier, for a while ran out of materials and couldn't send them. We've eventually got it done. There is a little more to do with some flooring. Gorham's has made some flooring available to us, and we now plan to do flooring in all of the units. And then I think we're pretty much finished. But I can assure you that for Kirk Kitson and I, we're not finished. Commander Kitson was a real supporter of the Salvation Army, as was Dudley Butterfield. And if you ask, well, why did you guys get hooked up together? Kirk and I know one another, but it was the Salvation Army that brought us, and the need that we both could see, that brought us together to get on with this project. So I'm sorry Kirk isn't here. Protocol says he can't come out in the public for a few days. He's been away. But Kirk and I, I'm sure, will try and keep up the work, keep up the support of the great work that the Salvation Army does worldwide, and especially for us here in Bermuda. But I want to thank the Salvation Army, Major Dill, and essentially Colonel Burch, because without his consent, we might have just been sent packing to go fix someone else's problem. We don't need you here. But we were delighted when Colonel Burch said, get on with it. That was what we wanted to hear. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
All right, at this time, we'll take questions from the media. Please, again, speak up so that you're here. Thank you.
Hello, Johnson Burch, we're almost up. Mention of new units coming in. Do we have an idea as to when they'll arrive, how large they will be, and how many people they're going to be able to assist?
We were working toward that end with the difficulties that we've had on the dock, as well as the coronavirus. We're looking now at the beginning of the year to have the first units showing up on the island.
And do you know how large these units are going to be, how many people they're going to be able to help?
Keino Furbert Jacobs is our project manager. I'll ask him to come forward to answer that question.
Yeah, I guess so. Good morning, all. Good morning, all. Thank you for coming out. Yes, in the first instance, we're doing phase 1, which will comprise of 12 units or 12 individual rooms with inside 2-story new development that you'll see shortly. It also comprises of the bathrooms that service all 12 on both floors. And then basically once we get to that stage, we'll move into the further stages to develop out the rest of the site.
And do you know where on the site these are going to be located?
So if you look over my right shoulder, hopefully it's not too big, you'll see a dilapidated building towards the back. That site goes pretty far back there. So essentially we'll be setting up there. So essentially these 2 buildings here to my right and left will remain in place.
And I guess we work towards the major. Are these new buildings going to be enough to meet the demand that exists in Bermuda for emergency housing?
That's a very good question. Currently, we hover around 25. Pre-COVID, we could house a little over 30. So we will be able to house more ladies and gentlemen who wish to be sheltered and who wish to be a part of the program that we will offer here. So we're really excited that we'll have more space, we'll have more rooms. We will certainly be encouraging those who are without shelter to come. There will be a place for many more. Whether or not it meets the entire need of the entire country of Bermuda, I think that remains to be seen. But we're very excited that we'll be able to offer greater services and more services to the folks of Bermuda.
And how has the COVID pandemic affected demand for Salvation Army services?
So with our shelter services, we've not seen a lot of different in demand. Where we've seen a spike, sometimes well over 250% increase, is in our food banks. And that's consistent both with our food banks on the east, on the west, and here in Hamilton. But again, thankfully, Bermudians have responded, and those who can give well. And we're grateful, again, for some of the partnerships who were listed earlier that have helped with the shelter. They also help with our feeding programs. They help with our food banks on the island.